10 little-known facts about the Ottoman Empire. Little-known fact number 1. The Sultan's tricky Janissary army recruitment. The Ottoman Empire had a clever recruitment system called the Devshirme. Imagine knocking on doors and saying, "Hello, we're here to take your son for the empire." Christian boys were forcibly recruited, converted to Islam, and trained to be elite soldiers, who knew that being kidnapped could come with a great job offer and dental benefits. Janissaries were forbidden from growing beards, not for tactical reasons, but probably because the Sultan couldn't stand their patchy teenage stubble. This led to a clean-shaven force, ready for battle and a night on the town. These soldiers were highly trained and loyal. Unless they weren't, Janissaries sometimes rebelled, because when you take people's sons and force them into a lifetime of servitude, it turns out they occasionally get a little cranky. Becoming a Janissary was like winning the world's least enjoyable lottery. Not only did you get a job for life, but you also got to wear the same uniform every day. So no need to worry about fashion choices. Fun fact, Janissaries were originally slaves, but ended up having more power than some nobles. Turns out the best way to rise in society is to start at rock bottom and work your way up, preferably with a sword in hand. They were among the first troops in the world to use muskets. Imagine the confusion. 1 minute, you're charging with swords, and the next, you're learning to reload like it's a musketry speed race. The Janissary band, Mater, was the world's first military marching band. Think heavy metal but with more trumpets and drums, loud enough to scare enemies and possibly give them headaches. Some Janissaries were gourmet chefs in their downtime. They even revolted once by flipping over their cooking cauldrons, a rebellious take on Hell's Kitchen without Gordon Ramsay yelling. For centuries, parents feared the sight of the Devshirme recruiters. It's like the medieval version of a "don't answer the door" scenario, except they weren't selling encyclopedias. Being a Janissary was considered prestigious. Who wouldn't want to be a weapon-wielding, musket-firing, non-beard-having soldier/chef? Definitely a LinkedIn profile to be proud of. Little-known fact number 2. The mysterious harem life. The Ottoman Sultan's harem wasn't just a giant room filled with women lounging around on cushions, though that might have been a perk. It was actually a highly political institution. Think Game of Thrones, but with more incense and less backstabbing, unless it was metaphorical. Women in the harem were super educated. They studied languages, art, music, and politics, so basically, they were more cultured than most people at your last dinner party. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mom, ran the show. Forget power behind the throne. This lady was the throne. If the Sultan messed up, it was probably because he didn't listen to his mom. Classic. Some concubines could rise to great power. One day you're folding towels in the palace, and the next, you're advising the Sultan on foreign policy. Not bad for a career path. Concubines weren't slaves in the way we think of them today. They could gain freedom, wealth, and even power. It's like Survivor, but instead of immunity idols, they're winning political clout. The harem had its own guards, the eunuchs, who were often the only men allowed in. Yes, it's awkward, but these eunuchs held serious power, which goes to show that losing certain body parts doesn't mean you can't boss people around. Contrary to popular belief, the Sultan didn't just spend all his time in the harem. He had an empire to run. The harem was more like an elite boarding school for potential queens than a love fest. Many of the women were foreign, captured in war, or given as diplomatic gifts. Because apparently, when flowers don't suffice, you give people. The Sultan's favorite concubine often became his legal wife, which was like winning the ultimate bachelor competition, minus the roses. Some concubines became regents for their sons when they were too young to rule. Talk about a mom who doesn't just pack lunches but packs a punch in core politics. Little-known fact number 3. The Ottomans' fashion sense. More than just turbans. Ottoman fashion was all about layers, like an onion or an overenthusiastic hiker. It wasn't just to stay warm. Those robes had serious status symbols. The bigger your clothes, the more power you had. Sultans wore magnificent kaftans with intricate embroidery. If they walked into a modern-day fashion show, they'd be giving haute couture a run for its money, though they'd need a larger runway for all that fabric. Turbans were a big deal. Literally, the bigger the turban, the more important you were. It's like wearing a crown but with more fabric and fewer jewel heists. Ottoman shoes were highly decorative, especially for the rich. Imagine sneakers today, but embroidered with gold and silk, making every step a royal event, even if you're just walking to the bathroom. The mustache was a critical part of the Ottoman man's identity. The more twirls you could get on those ends, the more respected you were. Imagine mustache competitions but taken very seriously. Women wore brightly colored dresses, and sometimes veils. Think of it as Ottoman Instagram. Everyone wanted to show off their best look, minus the filters. Fur was a status symbol. If you were rolling in sable fur, you were basically the Ottoman Empire's version of a high roller. But no worries, PETA didn't exist back then. The Ottomans loved jewelry. Men and women alike wore rings, bracelets, and necklaces, probably to distract from all the layers of fabric they were drowning in. Headgear wasn't just fashion, it was practically a language. You could tell someone's job, rank, and possibly even their astrological sign, just by what they were wearing on their head. Sultans had a fashion council. Yes, you heard that right, a fashion council. Their job was to ensure the Sultan's wardrobe was on point. What a gig! Little known fact number 4. Coffee culture, brewing revolution. The Ottoman Empire was one of the first places to embrace coffee culture. They were basically the original Starbucks, minus the complicated order names and loyalty points. Coffee houses were where men gathered to discuss politics, poetry, and probably complain about their wives not understanding their love for finely brewed beans. The Ottomans loved coffee so much that at one point, it was illegal for women to divorce their husbands unless they failed to provide enough coffee. Talk about grounds for divorce. The first Ottoman coffee houses were seen as scandalous. Imagine a medieval version of a rock concert where instead of wild music, it was just men sipping coffee and talking trash about their enemies. Coffee was so serious that wars were fought over it. You think people get mad over a Starbucks line today? Try starting a war because someone took your coffee trade routes. They even had coffee ceremonies, which made drinking coffee a ritual experience. It was less about caffeine and more about showing off your fancy cups and spoons. The Ottomans brought coffee to Europe, and from there, the world was hooked. So if you're enjoying a latte today, thank the empire for your caffeine fix. Sultans sometimes banned coffee, fearing that people gathered in coffee houses were plotting against them. Turns out, too much caffeine can indeed make you paranoid. Coffee houses were a mix of social club, political forum, and, well, Tinder. If you wanted to meet someone back then, you didn't swipe right. You just ordered an extra round of coffee and waited. The Ottomans even invented their own brewing method, Turkish coffee. It's thick, strong, and unfiltered, just like your one uncle who won't stop talking at family gatherings. Little known fact 5. Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan who had it all. Suleiman the Magnificent wasn't just a fancy name. He truly was magnificent. He ruled for 46 years, longer than any other Ottoman Sultan, proving that magnificent isn't just a title, it's a job description. Suleiman was a multi-talented ruler. Not only was he a fierce warrior and strategic genius, but he was also a poet. Because what better way to balance empire building than to spend your downtime writing sonnets about your feelings? He led the empire to its zenith, conquering new lands and expanding territory like a monopoly player who somehow never goes bankrupt. Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, everyone got a little piece of Suleiman's action. His marriage to harem Sultan, Roxolana, was a love story for the ages. She was originally a slave, but captured his heart, becoming one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Turns out, How to Marry a Sultan and Win an Empire could have been a best-selling self-help book. Suleiman built some of the most stunning architectural masterpieces of the empire, including the famous Suleimani Mosque. His architectural patronage was so good that modern-day Istanbul is practically his resume. He was an incredible lawmaker. Suleiman codified laws that reformed the Ottoman legal system, earning him the nickname Kanuni, the lawgiver, who says you can't be a tough warrior and also a nerd for rules and regulations. Suleiman had a solid public relations team. His reign is often portrayed as the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. Seriously, with his media team, even the bad days probably got spun into winning moments. The Sultan wasn't just into expansion, he was also a patron of the arts. Suleiman supported painters, musicians, and scholars, creating a cultural renaissance in the empire. Who needs the renaissance when you've got Suleiman funding your projects? Despite being called magnificent, he had some serious dad issues. His eldest son Mustafa was accused of treason, and Suleiman had him executed. Family drama, Ottoman style. Even after his death, Suleiman's legacy lived on. His tomb became a pilgrimage site, and centuries later, tourists still flock to see where the Magnificent rests. Talk about posthumous popularity. Little known fact 6. The Ottoman tulip craze. Yes, tulips were a big deal. During the 18th century, the Ottomans had a major obsession with tulips, like entire societal levels of obsession. If you didn't have tulips in your garden, were you even Ottoman? The craze was so intense that the period is literally called the Tulip Era. Imagine renaming a whole part of history after a flower. It's like calling the 1980s the mullets and neon era. Tulips became symbols of wealth, status, and luxury. Having a rare tulip in your garden was the ultimate flex, like owning a Lamborghini but way easier to water. Ottoman nobles threw lavish garden parties where tulips were the star. Think modern-day Instagram influencers, but replace avocado toast with flower beds. People spent ridiculous amounts of money on tulips. If you think you've made a bad financial decision, just remember that some Ottomans literally spent their fortunes on flowers that bloomed for a couple of weeks. Tulips became so valuable that the bulbs were traded like currency. Seriously, imagine going to a market and bartering with flower bulbs instead of coins. Tulip motifs were everywhere, on fabrics, ceramics, and even in architectural designs. Basically, if you saw a building and it didn't have a tulip on it, was it really an Ottoman building? The Ottoman court became so obsessed that some feared the empire was going to crumble, not because of war or famine, but because everyone was too busy tending to their tulips. The obsession even reached fashion. People wore tulip-shaped hats and designed their clothes to resemble the elegant curve of a tulip petal. Why stop at flowers in the garden when you could also dress like one? The Tulip Era eventually ended with a massive revolt. Turns out, while the nobles were busy with flowers, the common folk were busy getting mad about, real issues. Lesson: never let your love of gardening distract you from running an empire. Little known fact 7. The mysterious lost Sultan Osman II. Teenage rebellion gone wrong. Osman II became sultan at just 14 years old. Because, if you can't trust a teenager to rule an empire, who can you trust? He tried to reform the Janissary Corps, but they were not having it. Turns out, nobody likes it when a teenager tells them how to do their job, especially when that job involves swords. Osman II decided the best way to get rid of the rebellious Janissaries was to create a whole new army. It was like saying, "You don't like my rules? Fine, I'll just get new soldiers." Classic teen drama. Unfortunately, Osman underestimated the Janissaries' ability to stage a coup. They captured him and, in true medieval fashion, locked him away in a dungeon. No grounding necessary, just a lifetime of imprisonment. The Janissaries decided that simply imprisoning Osman wasn't enough. They executed him, becoming the first soldiers to kill a reigning sultan. Talk about taking teenage rebellion to a whole new level. Osman's short reign is often seen as a tragedy of youth and ambition. He had big ideas but lacked the wisdom or patience to implement them. Basically, he was the Ottoman version of someone who thinks they can fix everything after watching a couple of TED Talks. He was known for his boldness and military ambitions, but maybe someone should have told him to chill out and focus on one thing at a time, like passing high school history before trying to rewrite it. His death sent shockwaves through the empire. It showed that the Janissaries had way too much power, and also that maybe promoting teenagers to absolute power wasn't the best idea. Osman II's tomb became a sight of mourning, especially for those who believed he could have been a great reformer. Sadly, we'll never know if his reforms would have worked, or if he would have just spent the next decade arguing with his generals about curfews. Osman II's life is a reminder that running an empire is hard enough when you're an adult. Imagine doing it while dealing with acne and puberty. Not exactly a recipe for success. Little known fact 8. The Ottoman Navy, masters of the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire had one of the most formidable navies in the Mediterranean. You'd better believe those sailors weren't just hanging out in fancy hats. They were conquering entire coastlines. Under Admiral Barbarossa, no relation to the pirate of Pirates of the Caribbean fame, the Ottomans became masters of the sea, dominating naval battles like it was a waterborne version of Risk. The Ottomans didn't just build ships, they built floating fortresses. These ships had enough cannons to make any enemy reconsider their life choices, especially if they forgot their swim trunks. The Navy's primary job wasn't just to look intimidating, though they were very good at that. They were also responsible for controlling trade routes and keeping the empire's coffers filled with sweet loot. Ottoman pirates, officially called corsairs, roamed the Mediterranean, raiding European ships and coasts. Basically, they were the original pirates of the Mediterranean, but with more headscarves and fewer parrots. The Ottomans used their navy to expand the empire's reach, capturing islands and port cities, which became important trading hubs. It was like collecting real estate, but with more explosions and fewer mortgages. They built impressive shipyards, like the one in Istanbul, then Constantinople, which was one of the largest in the world. The Ottomans were so good at building ships that if they had been around during the Titanic, it might have survived its maiden voyage. The Navy wasn't just about fighting, they also had diplomatic roles, transporting ambassadors and showing off Ottoman might.